If you want to do something else with your time, you're in the wrong place, like go do something else. You're also welcome to have a camera on because it's fun to see people, and you're also welcome to have your camera off because being on Zoom all the time is relentless. So do what you want with that. We're recording. My name's Scott Nine. I'm an assistant superintendent at ODE. Usually Jennifer Patterson co-hosts these calls. She'll join us hopefully at the half-hour mark. But until then, we've got a great support team from ODE here to help. If this happens to be your first time, this has really been built as a place to offer updates and clarity around Ready Schools guidance, a place for questions and thinking, particularly from other practitioners. And we've really enjoyed the ways in which people have gotten into the practice of answering each other's questions and sharing good information. And it's really a place for kind of offering some two-way communication. And so it's also a really valuable place for us as a department to listen and hear patterns and things that aren't landing or need more clarity. And often we do work that comes from what we hear on the calls. So thanks for that. We can go to the next slide. Yeah, there we are. All Stewart, Ashley, Joanne, and Michelle are all around and in the chat and helping make all the magic happen. We track your questions, even if we don't respond or we can't answer. We do ask if you've got something that's super specific and wouldn't really apply to everyone else, that you'd be mindful about how much time you would take on the call. We don't want to make people cautious, so don't hesitate to put the questions out there. But if we hedge off of over diving in, it's just because we're trying to, this is one of the things that makes the calls really interesting is that we've got folks from public districts and charter schools and private schools and ESDs and OHA, and that makes it really valuable as a kind of come together, but sometimes we can get to a spot where it's not as helpful for everybody. And again, we record and post them as soon as we get them up and around, and I think we'll share links to that on the chat. A reminder for your calendaring, the week of the 22nd of March is where ODE, not everyone, but ODE will honor kind of spring break time, so we won't have a call that Monday. Today's call will focus on walking through the Ready Schools, the recent updates to Ready Schools Safe Learners and the scenario planning documents, and just touching on a few of the relevant updates there. To the extent needed, we'll touch on the kind of updates around sports, PE, and visual and performing arts. We've got a few slides on equitable grading that come from a webinar that was produced, but we'll spend most of our time today with answering your questions and answers in the chat, answering your questions and answers. Well, answer your answers. It's going to be really good. You're going to answer all of your own questions. If we go back a slide, let me just, actually, I think, Joanne, it might be most helpful for us to swap out and let me screen share for a minute, and I will put up the communication that came out with the update. So, screen, yep, there we go. So you should be able to see my screen now. This is the email that went out on Friday. It went out to thousands of folks. If you didn't get it, that means we don't have you on one of these core lists. So we'd want to remedy that. But we named that we were releasing an update to Ready School Safe Learners. I'll click this link in a minute. It'll take us to that document. But we outlined some of the things that were in this relatively small change and catching a couple little tiny tweaks. Probably the one that is really just naming something that maybe we would have hoped was implicit or obvious, but we seem to be getting into some puzzles around, is that RSSL guidance is what schools follow. So that's just the headline message. We had a few situations where schools would say, well, wait, I'm pointing to this other source, sometimes even the CDC, and say, well, I follow that. That's not how it works here. So the important part is those are important places of input for us, but we work with OHA, digest the CDC guidance, and unless it's by federal order, which we'll talk about in terms of transportation, which is different, those are really inputs to process. So you do have to follow what's in RSSL, just in terms of connectivity, but we re-emphasize that. We also took things that we had put out over email as kind of clarifications or requirements to needing to offer the school-based antigen testing program from OHA and just bake them in. So if you follow it along, it won't be anything new, but we just codified that in the document. We tried to further clarify cohorting. We essentially tried to take what seemed to be a message that was about how to learn outdoors, got converted into kids don't have to wear face masks at recess. So we tried to rapidly clear up that that's not accurate. Kids need to wear face coverings when they're at recess. And then we did work to conform with this federal transportation order, which we know is a little complicated. So you may have questions about that. Along with those updates to Ready School Safe Learner, we also updated after quite a while the planning for COVID-19 scenarios in schools document. We've talked about that quite a bit on these calls. The upside is it was delayed because we were getting really excellent, good additional input from school nurses and feel good, I think, about where it's landed functionally. But it took a little bit more time. The biggest change there, there's lots of little small tweaks, but the biggest change there is that it now names that when you've had both shots and 14 days post-vaccination, you do not need to quarantine. And it kind of codifies that. So we were planning on that, counting on it, naming it, but now it's there solidly for you to point to. Couple other little small things. We released an updated operational blueprint template. You do not need to fill it out, except when you change instructional models. We welcome you if you want to update yours for the sake of it. The reason we updated it was we learned that our template could be made even more accessible for folks using like a screen reader. And so we wanted to make it, we wanted it to be perfect rather than close to perfect. So we updated it. But basically at the point in time where you would update, you'd use that new template. But again, you're welcome if you want to update on your own. And then this interactive tool had actually been up and out, but we kind of wanted to give it a little more visibility. So when folks do their weekly status reports that you turn into us, that populates into this interactive tool. So I'm just going to briefly pop you through to these specific documents so you can see. Joni, the format of that is to, in order to be fully accessible, we had to break some parts of the column table format. So in certain places you'll enter, it's the same information. It's just trying to make sure we're meeting accessibility. So here's that first link to updated Ready School Safe Learners. If you're like me, these are all things that you're finding every day, but you know you have the right one when you're at 5.6.2. If you don't have 5.6.2 on February 19th, you're looking at an old one. At your all's feedback and request, because this was small changes, we kept all the prior changes from a bigger update in green italics. And the newest changes are in red and bold because people have kind of told us repeatedly that that's helpful when there's a change. So don't get confused. You're looking for red and bold as the new stuff. The good news is the release notes covers the new stuff. So there's really not that much new, which is why we're from 5.5 to 5.62. Then the new scenario planning in schools document, again, off the ODE website. You want to look for this updated February 19th, 2021. Now this document hadn't been updated in a long time, so we just used green italics to catch the new things. So that'll help you spot those changes. We talked about the blueprint, and then here's that fancy interactive tool that basically takes the weekly report and it shows us how we map based on what the advisory metrics, that's the background color. And then the dot basically tells you how we're reporting. It gives you some options in terms of ways you can select some different counties, and you can choose to search by school, but it gives you kind of a quick look at information that is otherwise reported by spreadsheet. And so if you have questions about any of that, but it gives you kind of a clear way to look at it. And I think that's everything by way of update. Again, we'll run through lots of Q&A, but that kind of gives you the headlines. And now, Joanne, I will yield back the screen for you to put the slides back up. And we'll briefly touch on these equitable slides. Let me put the link directly, Summer, to, let's see. Here is the link. You can also get there off the ODE RSSL page. It's mapped across. Okay. Oh, I didn't mention, but we put out a message the week prior about K-12 sports and athletics, and at that time we restored the PE and visual and performing arts guidance in RSSL. They're there again in the RSSL document. We had a few folks writing us kind of saying, when are you going to update PE or performing arts after they were updated? So we just were really here renaming that they are updated and linked, and they're in the RSSL document. If you have questions, again, we'll use Q&A time for that, to do that. Again, you want to go to the Ready Schools Safe Learners document, and the links to PE and visual performing arts are in section 5F. Instructional and extracurricular activities requiring additional consideration. You're welcome. Okay, now a couple slides on equitable grading. So Ashley, I'm hoping you might provide the link to the full equitable grading webinar. The team in the Office of Teaching, Learning, and Assessment, based on some positive feedback, has been trying to continue to help support folks who are making what are clearly at this point local school and district decisions as it relates to grading. The highlights in this slide kind of speak for themselves, but the research has basically continued to demonstrate that where grades are present based on content that the instructors provided, meaning you shouldn't be grading things you're not teaching. Want to look for them to be bias resistant, is language from the more recent research. Ways that take away or mitigate for unconscious or implicit bias. Criterion reference, mathematically accurate. They've done a lot of work around looking at weighting and understanding the difference between a 50 and a 0. Based on performance, based on proficiency, based on a rubric, and there's opportunities for reteaching and retaking and learning. These are small highlights. The webinar has quite a bit more detail. Oh, I lied to you. The link's coming out. That was a teaser trailer for the equitable grading webinar. So I guess this is all like the cue of that. And I'm covering here for Jennifer Patterson and her team in case you didn't notice, but I'm doing my best job to share. All right, let's go to the next slide. Some things that webinar will spell out in more detail, but again, we're wanting to remind folks, and hopefully you've picked up this message already. We had gotten kind of word that folks were kind of waiting on ODE to take state action, and we're being very consistent and clear. I hope that there's a lot of room for local decision making, but it will be a local decision, not a state one. So we're trying to really put resource to help you make those choices well. But also wanting to make clear that you're not waiting on ODE to somehow weigh in at a statewide level. So things you can do: allow for late work, retakes, and revisions. Don't have any punishment or shame around any of that. Develop and apply scoring skills that eliminate all the zeros, because mathematically they don't actually make any sense. Use incompletes to reflect when work is insufficient or not complete instead of Fs, and focus on formative assessment and feedback. And then again, we've provided this link in the chat, some resources. We're citing some research here. Ashley will put the slides to this little small thing, a link to these slides, but that full webinar is coming with richer detail and more information. But just wanted to keep that on folks' radar screen. All right. Now we're at the time where you get asked all kinds of questions and we do our best to answer. And Ashley and Joanne and Michelle are going to help me curate the chat and call out questions because I'm not a great multitasker. So anybody spot initial ones?
So Scott, just a recent question from Shauna Taylor. She's a school nurse. For COVID testing in Oregon schools document, will there be a separate registration form for return to football?
So Shauna, I understand that different districts and KT's on the line, so KT, you should feel free to weigh in here. But from an ODE perspective, this is not a dimension of this work that we're going to weigh in on or respond to really. School districts, I know, and often OSBA are working on these kinds of questions, and there's a lot of different legal choices and ways to think about that. There is very specifically, and if you are following the governor's K-12 guidance and you want to provide contact sports and you're in a high risk or extreme risk county, you are required to complete an opt-in form. And that one, let me share my screen again and show that off. And then KT, feel free to add anything. So off the Ready School site now, can you see my screen okay? Off the Ready School site, here is the outdoor contact sports plans. At the top of that, it describes the template to be completed, and then how you get it updated. You can see who's already done that work. This is required to do contact sports if you're in medium or high risk county, or I'm sorry, extreme or high risk counties, as per that guidance. And so maybe, Shauna, that's what you're talking about. Or maybe I'm missing it altogether, Shauna, and you have something else that's on your mind. You want to unmute and say more?
I think that answers it. I just noticed that the OSA refers directly to the COVID testing in schools document, which when you go to that document, it only gives you a registration form, like for the entire school. Like we don't have our entire school going back at this moment. We're still trying to meet those metrics, but football may be going back and our numbers might be low enough where next week we won't even be in high risk anymore. So I don't know. I was just looking for a registration form specific for like that contact sports, because it just.
Got it. Okay, thanks. And sorry if I wasted your time prior. So there's a little bit of echo. You're going to want to, well, you're going to want to write to that email address. I'm not going to use it right now. But you're going to want to write to this school testing at COVID. I was going to try to clip it in here for you. And Jamaica Baker Flowers leads the effort to coordinate that program. Boy, that's really hard to do. She coordinates that program, and I understand is helping schools through that registration process and understanding how to do it, even if it's not kind of a perfect setup yet. So I would just email her and get started. That's the best way. KT, do you want to add anything to that part of the conversation?
No, I think you're right on track, Scott. I think that's how we understand it as well, is because it's as much as maybe your school has not started yet, still it falls under the school. So it's still following the school testing guidance. So there's not a separate scenario for it. But yeah, I think I would start with that email first. So and go that direction for any further guidance for that. But thanks, Scott.
Great. I'm going to work from the top down. I'm seeing lots of questions. Ashley or Michelle, you have anything that you want to call out?
So I'm just going from the very beginning, Scott. We had a question from Katie Noons regarding whether or not staff will have been fully vaccinated, both doses plus 14 days, if they have to quarantine upon returning from out-of-state travel.
Yeah, I know there's been a consistent question about how or if the travel advisory from OHA will be updated. And I understand that it is going to be updated. The meeting that I was in on Thursday, it was still not updated. And I anticipate it will make this same adjustment, although it was getting debated. So I'm really like, I don't want to tell you that until it's landed, because it's I don't know, often we have OHA colleagues on the call, so feel free to jump in if anyone is on from OHA today. I know they were actively working on this, but I don't believe it's settled yet. Again, that's a travel advisory. It's something that's very helpful where as employers, schools are trying to operate that advisory and put it into policy or practice. I do think it will get updated. I anticipate it soon, but I think need to wait till it finally gets landed before saying it's firmly in place. And a little pause in case OHA colleagues are on today.
Hi, Scott, this is Kristen. I don't think we have confirmation yet. I'm hoping by tomorrow.
Thank you, Kristen, for jumping in. I appreciate that. And thanks for being
Of
on.
course.
All right, let's keep rolling through. Denise, I see that you didn't get the email. I'm bummed about that, and I don't really understand why, but I will track the puzzle about how school nurses don't always get these emails. So I will take responsibility for that. And what else you got, Michelle or Ashley?
I have one question for you, Scott. Does the new mandate for masks on anyone over 2 years old on public transport include preschoolers and ECSE kiddos?
Yeah, EIECSE, which is a fun acronym to say like 5 times fast, if any of you are bored. This is complicated, but the best I can offer for the moment. So the rules around early learning programs follow ELD guidance, and that is not ODE's area to authorize or say. We felt it was important to link to the direct order as a resource so that people would have it. We understand that in Oregon, at least what I should say is that Oregon, ODE is implementing it within the kind of domain that we see as feasible or practical. And there is an area where our guidance stops with face coverings at age 5 as opposed to age 2. And there's some ongoing conversation with OHA and the ELD and trying to figure out kind of like what's essentially a kind of jurisdiction or authority question. I think there's a preference to keep it at age 5, and we're trying to sort out whether we're allowed to do that, and then the domain of that as it relates to transportation. And so I know that doesn't give you a clear answer. It's on the agenda to continue to kind of puzzle through, and so that's going to leave you in a little bit of fuzzy space for the moment, which I know you all love. But that's kind of where it is at the moment. But we felt like we needed to give the update as it relates to everything else, which is pretty clear. So that's what I have to offer on that one. Thanks for the question.
Scott, I've got kind of a beefy question here. This is from Rachel Barnett Banks.
Okay.
It says on scenario 1A and 1B that a student has been exposed to a positive COVID case in or outside the household and not currently showing symptoms, it says to offer COVID testing in the school if available. Shouldn't they not be at school in the first place if they've been exposed? And then she also added, and I thought we are not supposed to test unless they have symptoms.
Great question. So, so what this is, man, you were right. This is an intricate question. So let me help. I'm going to share my screen again and do my best to walk through this. So first, here is what, and Rachel Barnett Banks, feel free to unmute and talk through at any point as well. So here's, I think, what you're referencing in the guidance is
And
this.
I think it's Rochelle. I think I mispronounced her name the first time. Sorry.
Rochelle. We like it. Michelle knows I like trying to get names right. So she's like, okay. So here's what you're referencing, and then let's talk about what this anchors from and where the language really matters a lot. There's some complexity here. So I have clicked over to that OHA testing strategy document. And I am going to page 9. Let me see if I can get this to blow up a little more. Okay, so when we put out clarifications about the testing program in an email from Colt, and again now in the RSSL, we tried to acknowledge we didn't do a great job in initial rollout headlining this second option. It is included in the training materials from OHA with Dr. Judy Guzman Cotrell. But we didn't really kind of walk people through this aspect of the program. So what it says is that when a school cohort's been exposed to a case and they've been quarantined, testing on day 5 and 7, day 5 through 7, one-time test, not multiple tests, one-time test, but in that period of time, following exposure could be used to facilitate an early release from quarantine after day 7 when recommended by the local public health authority. For example, if a cohort's exposed on January 1st, that cohort could be tested between the 6th and 8th and released if all the tests were negative and exposed students are symptoms free. Now, first clarity is we are not talking about symptomatic kids. We're talking about possibly exposed students. Second, we're naming something that is a program aspect that would only happen if recommended by your LPHA. So this is not something you have to do. If your LPHA says in the situation of dealing with an outbreak, hey, this might be an avenue where you have the testing program in place. Here's the situation based on what we know from case investigation. This might be a place where this would apply. Then you can potentially deploy this as a way to shorten the amount of quarantine. Not a requirement, an option with these dynamics and things in place in coordination with your LPHA. That's a lot. That's a lot. And some communities and LPHAs and schools have a lot of appetite for this dimension of this program offering, and others don't want to touch it. Their LPHA either from a place of capacity or they don't think it's a worthwhile thing. And obviously it won't apply if schools have it in place. What was happening in the markup of the document was to try to name the spots where these things interacted so that the document would feel complete and they crosstalk, but I definitely see where it could cause a little bit of confusion. So does that help explain it?
So that helps with 1B, but 1A that says a person exposed in their household, that's totally different than being exposed in their cohort. So that wouldn't be.
That's a good point. It doesn't actually really, I agree with you. Let me run that back with OHA. I agree that
because we wouldn't bring them in if they're.
You wouldn't take someone from a household exposure who'd never been at school or part of a cohort. I agree with you. I think that's a good clarification. Let me work on that as an action item.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're like, all that explanation, Scott, and all I really wanted to tell you was that one, and I was kidding. Wendy, go ahead.
When you're doing that, can you just check in? Because part of what the data shows is that for people who are asymptomatic, that test is not terribly reliable. And so some of the nurses are saying, well, why are we using it for asymptomatic people anyway? So if you can get some explanation on that, that would be great. Thanks.
Yeah, that one I push back a little bit and say, I hear you. I know that that's out there, but in the email resources and training from Dr. Judy Guzman, she's on video at length in that webinar that is a part of training for the program, explaining this and explaining why and the rationale. So I would really defer to her expertise and the rationale that is in that video training and slides. But there is a really good, I think, scientific based explanation for the program. And I understand some people still might like it, but I would defer to that longer explanation. And I'll try to pull in, if I can, again, I'm not a great multitasker, but I'll try to pull in the, actually, give me just a second. It might not be that hard. Let's see, we'll do it together in case you want to see. I'm going to the RSSL page. I'm going to news and updates, and I'm going to the February 16th COVID-19 school testing program. And then here's the recording to the webinar, and I will put that link in the chat as well. But it really, she goes into quite a bit of detail about that. Great. All right, let's keep going.
Scott, this one may or may not tie into kind of what you were just talking about, but there have been a couple of requests to talk through the new cohorting definitions, and there's a few people echoing that.
Mhm. Okay, so first of all, thank you. It's important. We almost made a slide about it, and there's a little bit of debate about that. So this is an effort. So I understand that for how am I going to say this? This is an area that for some people will feel like a clarification, or like, wow, that's what I always thought. And for other people will go like, wow, that feels new or different. And I'm gonna try to break it down. So what became really clear in the last few weeks was that there's lots of detail and very different, close to similar but not the same understandings of the cohorting definition. And for clarity purposes, I'll call option A the situation that says essentially there is, think of like a wing of a building with 4 classrooms with 20 kids each. And that wing of the building, those 80 kids could intermingle and are collectively a cohort. That group might have 20 adults that comes in and out through them, which would make that total max at 100. Those 20 adults might move into other parts of the building or wing, but those 80 kids would never move or interact with other people. Therefore, a cohort of 100 and a max of that. And that is not a bad idea. It is not wrong. In fact, you could argue from the CDC's recent guidance that that is a more stringent definition that mitigates more risk, makes for better contact tracing and faster phenomenons in terms of execution. Option B is the viewpoint and interpretation that you have those students in, let's say, still in that wing environment, but any given student is not bounded to those 80 contacts. In fact, they might only interact with the kids in one of those classrooms or 2 of those classrooms, and they might intermingle their schedule with other kids from other parts of the school. But from a student design perspective, that one student will not interact with more than, I'm going to use the number 80, more than 80 other kids in the building in a given week. But and then also I have adults in my count as a student. So my student experience is the totality of 100. But my 100 might be different than my neighbor's 100. And the way that we contact trace is through that student's log. And functionally, for some people, B equals A, and for other people, they're very different. Mathematically, they are not the same. Functionally and scheduling, they are not the same. Option B provides more flexibility and is different. It still has requirements. It puts a higher burden on very clear logs to know who all the students interacting with. We'd have to get really into the weeds. Well, what we are doing in this guidance is just further pinning down that B is allowed and B fits under the definition, and B requires that kind of still rigor and attention, but that kind of flexibility. And again, A might be a really good idea and mitigate more risk and be easier to implement for some people, and for other people makes middle and high school schedules impossible. And so the increased definition is trying to land that one more. We've gotten stuck, and the goal here is to kind of definitively explain what that option B is for folks' design. And I'm glad that was recorded, because maybe I can use it for the future. So again, and I'd be curious, almost like I don't have a poll prepared, but I think my hunch is that about half of you were like, that's what I always understood for option B. And about half of you are like, I always thought it was option A. And what we realized was it was getting very confused. And so we're trying to pin that down.
Oh,
Questions on cohorting before we move on to a different subject? And Adam, did that get you that
I
time?
see. Because when I was a kid, I sliced right down there. They had this stitch
Mark Siegel, can
trying
you
to
mute yourself?
carved beyond the carving material in my hand.
Nope.
Scott, yes,
Oh,
I
good.
question. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Adam.
Okay.
Uh, Ashley,
Okay, and I'll be out there Wednesday.
Michelle, can we mute
Af-
Mark? Thank you. Cool. All right, let's move on to another subject.
Okay, Scott, I have a couple of questions here. I think they are related. So I'm going to try not to overwhelm you because there's quite a few questions within these questions. So the first one is from Stephanie Walker at Arthur Academy. Are there any updates to the operational blueprint template besides the removal of the table? And do we need to update our hybrid blueprint if we have used the template from January?
Great question. There is a small content change in the restoration of the 0 section as a place for people to address the requirements related to testing if it applies to them. And then it is updated, as it always is, to match any changes in RSSL. So whenever there's changes in requirements. However, if you filled it out previously and you have not changed the instructional model, as has been the kind of rule of thumb, you don't need to go and update it. You don't need to do it unless you're changing instructional model. So at the point that you're moving from CDL to hybrid or hybrid to fully on-site, then we'd ask you to use that new template. But at any other point, even though that template's changed to match up, we're going to work with the one you've previously done. That's basically just to kind of honor the fluidity of the situation and not trying to have folks do busy administrative work, but catch updates as you move models. So hopefully that answers your question.
And then this is the one that may or may not be related to what you just said. For the scenarios document, will the link for the visual flow chart be updated as well, or the one-page exclusion visual chart be updated?
Yeah, the summary exclusion guide at the moment is not updated, meaning, let me say that more carefully. We think it is still reflective of the overall document, but we review almost all these documents on a regular basis to look for kind of small updates or changes. And we are talking about whether the change in quarantine language needs to make that chart or not. So we're working that through, and there may be an update, but we don't have one in the immediately near future planned. For folks who aren't familiar with what I'm talking about, I will put a link in the chat. I think I will. There you go. This is what we're referring to. All right, let's keep going.
So this one's from Ben, and he is saying that he noticed the performing arts includes on-site and hybrid, but he's wondering if this guidance also applies to LIPI or extracurricular, and if not, where he can find that guidance.
Extracurricular is a little complicated. We would refer, as we do with other things, to the governor's and OHA's guidance around indoor and outdoor recreation and youth program. Depending on the nature of the extracurricular. We're working with OHA in trying to problem solve how to have this guidance talk with other aspects of the governor and OHA's guidance. This new version adds some wrinkles that still have a little bit of like, they could be a little more precise. So we're doubling back again to solve some of these kinds of questions. But I would say as it relates to, if
so that makes part of your time work.
Mark, if you could mute, please. I lost my train of thought. If you're going to offer some type of program in limited in person, I would absolutely recommend that you apply them, and we'll try to clean up the language around that so it doesn't feel so confusing. So point taken there. Did I get all the aspects of that one, Michelle?
I think so. I have one here from John Day School District. We have not found a mask or face shields that will not fog glasses. We have drivers who will lose visibility of the road if wearing a mask or face shield. Do you have any recommendations?
Yeah, so this is an area where we're gonna all have to approach this with some combination of creativity and resourcing. So I know that some transportation directors are passing around information. We can't, as the state, point you to vendors of specific products, but there are anti-fogging products that do seem to work quite well. The OHA and CDC, when posed these questions, gave us the kind of simplicity of like, a very good Band-Aid bridged across the nose of a mask will prevent your glasses from fogging up. And they kind of refused to change the expectation. For our purposes, we obviously don't want drivers driving with fogged up glasses, but we're also clear from the federal guidance that masks need to be worn. And while drivers might be frustrated about that change, and I know because we worked hard to kind of try to find the right balance of this language previously, we're all going to have to problem solve. You obviously don't want to put people in threat, so we as a state have to name what those rules are now. You might have to operationalize that by giving folks a week or two to transition into that. You have to make your own choices. From the state perspective, we now have to meet this federal expectation, and folks need to figure out how to problem solve how to do that. I see a question from Kevin Miller about the second vaccination. That, Kevin, is in the scenario planning document. All of the documents are part of the kind of family of RSSL, but if you're looking for that specific language, it's in the planning for COVID-19 scenarios in schools document.
So Scott, there's a pretty lengthy set of questions here for librarians from Karen Patton. So from one of our school librarians, they would love to hear what is being laid out specifically for libraries. Sorry, I'm trying to navigate the the wording here. Can students come into the library by class or cohort? What would be required in between cohorts as far as cleaning, sanitizing, and time delay?
Yeah.
Can students browse the shelves? And if they can browse the shelves or a selection of shelves, what would be required for book recirculation?
All right, so I'm going to be pretty transparent in this moment about the library and book and care for books. As a book lover, it sounds to me like there has been some rounds of feedback about a request for additional formal state guidance about the care of library books and processes, kind of like these questions that folks would like RSSL to be updated with. And the document that I got that tried to kind of summarize those changes did not feel complete or ready or robust enough to be able to take to OHA or to spur questions. So we're going to do some work on our staff side to try to ground out at what detail, from whom, how widely felt are the needs, and do folks really have, are they more like problem of practice questions, or are they actual changes and guidance questions? And then once clear and detailed sufficiently, then we will take them to OHA for review and possible change. If you're a librarian, that probably feels frustrating because you probably feel like you've been asking this question for a long time. So I apologize for that. But I also just want to be clear, like it's just not, we're just not yet at the point of enough detail, precision of what's being requested to be able to move forward. So we are aware of that. And if you have ideas or suggestions about how to better pull all the librarians together to land that, I'm open to your feedback about the best way to accomplish it.
And Scott, hi, it's Alexa. We
Hey,
do
Alexa.
have a meeting set up with we do have a meeting set up for next week to start this process.
Awesome. Even better, we're already ahead of the, of course, we're behind the curve and ahead of the curve at the same time, but we're glad to have a meeting to do that. Welcome, Alexa. All right, I think we got time for a few more.
So here's one about performing arts guidance that was linked in the recent email about OSAA. The guidance never seems to state clearly whether any in-person singing is permitted. Could students sing outdoors and masked if they stand 12 feet apart?
Yeah, we understand, I understand the guidance if you were outdoors with face coverings and, probably they definitely want you to be more than 6 feet apart, definitely 12 feet, that would be allowable in the guidance. The part that's less clear, and we know is an issue and is on the agenda for OHA, is about somewhere between the main document and this additional document and the revision with the governor's document has opened this space where some people might be interpreting that you can sing indoors with masks off. And that would be very high risk and we think really problematic depending on how it was done. So we're kind of scrambling to try to get sharper clarity. What I'd ask in the meantime is while we work out the letter of the rule details, please on behalf of the children you care for, don't have folks within 6 feet with face masks off singing at each other indoors, regardless of how you feel about it. Like just don't do that. And while we get the language clear, but I understand that outdoors would be more than okay, especially masks off in that kind of space.
And Scott, this one is about county metrics. So as some county metrics get closer to the hybrid model, Caitlin just wants to make it clear that schools are mandated to offer CDL through the end of the 2020-21 school year.
Not quite following that one. Caitlin, can you unmute and maybe share your thinking a little bit more if you're comfortable?
Oh, sure. The impression that we've been under is that even if metrics do go down into the hybrid status, that we will still be required to provide a CDL option to students that wish to remain at home.
Yeah, I would say that there are different ways to tease apart the language, but functionally, yes, for a variety of reasons. In particular, there's a bunch of different reasons why, but there is a for the purposes of serving students or families who would not feel comfortable to come in, for the purposes of having an option when someone has a value-based reason they don't want to wear a face covering. There's a bunch of different ways that get you to the bottom line of yes, offer CDL.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Scott, I'm also noticing that someone from the Oregon School Nurses Association has their hand raised for a question.
Oh, okay. Apologies. We don't usually do hand raising, but feel free to jump in. Let's hear what you got.
It was me, and I just unraised it. Sorry about that.
Oh, no problem. All right, let's take 2 or 3 more.
So there's one here about whether or not the performing arts. Nope. I think we answered that question. Okay. There's one in regards to cohorts. What are some options to run lunch? And do the cohorts need to stay below 100?
Okay, great. So let me pause real quick. And Jennifer, I didn't know for sure if you were on or not, but I see you in the chat. So welcome and feel free to jump in and thanks for joining in. The 100 max limit in the way we broke it down absolutely includes mealtime and has to during the school day. It does not include transportation to school. It does not include after school athletics or activities. It absolutely includes break and lunch and meal times. There is an entire section about meal times in RSSL. And quite a bit of important detail there. Let me make sure to call out what section it is. Let's see. We're looking at section 2H in RSSL. And that might be one where, like, if you need more consultation about how to approach that, that's a good email, and let's follow up and talk details about your design or schedule. And so, reach out and let us know. It's a little tougher all together. But that's an important detail. Joni Parsons asks a very good and complicated question. Are you insisting on closed campuses? I'm not sure how you could keep that 100-person cohort otherwise, but I understand that some districts have tried to argue or come up with a way to do that. I'll leave that for them to figure out how to do. And then the state has to respond if folks seem like they're not fitting with that. But it would be hard to parse how you would fit those things together. But I guess you could argue that your campus could be open, and as long as students come back to and aren't eating with other students, there might be ways to do it. You all might know better than I do on that. I've heard of a few districts who are approaching open campuses. The only couple that I know of very rapidly changed their mind and went back to closed, based on realizing that wasn't the best way to be successful at this moment in time. But all right, what else?
So Scott, this one asks if it's true that Oregon OSHA wants to make the COVID workplace rules permanent and that they will apply to all schools, public and private. These are very strict rules. And if so, how can we efficiently defeat this initiative?
Okay, that's an important question. So this is where state lingo might trip folks up, and I'll try to explain it. So when there is all state administrative bodies have to go through rulemaking, and rulemaking is like administrative law, which is different than law passed by legislators, but it has the same force. When we're responding in an emergency, we have typically the ability to make temporary rules. And those temporary rules go before whatever the administrative body is. So OSHA has its own body. ODE, it's typically the State Board of Education. Early Learning Division has its own Early Learning Board. And those have very detailed requirements for community engagement and process. But when you're in an emergency, you can get those temporary rules passed. Well, so that's what OSHA did early on in COVID, was they made the temporary rules. But by law, by statute, they have to be made permanent after 6 months, or they don't exist anymore. I can promise, and if it's helpful, we can talk maybe, Jennifer, about bringing someone from OSHA to a call or figure out how to help people do that. I guarantee you OSHA is not wanting these to be like forever rules. They are kind of permanent within COVID, but they're required to make them permanent. And part of that actually means that they're required to meet higher standards of engagement and language in order for the board to pass those things. In order to do that, the rules are posted for all of you to get to engage with. So now is the time, if you have changes, feedback, you think one rule is too hard to implement, too strict as it relates to OSHA, now's the window of time to provide that kind of feedback. And then OSHA's rulemaking body makes the formal decision about adopting them. But when we talk about them as permanent, that doesn't mean they're forever. In fact, OSHA can then go back and change them. So they might go back and change them, a year from now or 2 years from now, at whatever point it comes due. But I know that the vernacular of that might be very alarming. So, you're certainly welcome to your opinion or feeling or engagement, but that's just structurally how rulemaking works. We have the same thing at ODE where the state board took certain actions, but while we made them initially temporarily, we have to make them permanent, even though we know that likely they'll only be on the books for a couple of years, and we'll take them back because that's just how the rulemaking process works. Jennifer, I don't know if you can add anything to that, but.
Yeah, that was great.
Let's take time for one more and then we will close up. We covered a lot of ground.
Scott, if I may, probably because this is something that Alexa and I deal with often, is the question around instructional time. So I tried to put a clarification in the chat, but I know sometimes it's hard to attend to the chat while we're also listening to one another. So I just want to be really clear that what we did to solve for instructional time this year is we held the high watermark of what's been required previously in Oregon through Division 22 for instructional time. So the time requirement did not diminish. Where there was some additional flexibility was that you can, in your Division 22 instructional time requirements, you can count up to 3 times more professional learning time and up to 3 times more of consultation and parent conferencing time as allowable. So it extends and creates more opportunity for you to count those non-student contact time as instructional time. So when people are saying, I appreciate that you're all in this forward momentum space, just like we are thinking ahead already to school year 2021-22, and you're asking the question, what will be required of us for instructional minutes? My best advice is to hold on to that same watermark of instructional time requirements that are outlined in Division 22. Alexis put them in the chat, and we can put them there again. I would also say, just like anything, remain very flexible and keep very committed to a minimum of that instructional time, because what we know and what we're reading is that it could be very possible that we have to get creative in how we maximize learning opportunities for students. So I would not go below that line, and also want to make sure that you understand that what we're saying is what's true today on February 22nd, 2021. And a lot can shift between now and then in terms of what's required for the coming school year. But that's our best counsel for this moment.
That was beautiful, Jennifer. Thanks. Alexa, anything on top of that? Good. All right, we're going to wrap our time there. It's great, Jennifer, to have you close us as the usual opener. And I know we moved around topics, but hopefully this helped get people a lot more information and definitely tracked questions we didn't get to, which we'll loop back around to. Hope everybody is doing as well as possible amidst all the challenges and storms and trees and impacts and COVID fatigue and all the other ways in which we're experiencing a lot of challenge at the moment. And I think we're closed for today. Thanks again.
We'll see you in March.